Welcome back to the next session, session 8, that is on teaching China in India, narratives and experiences of foreign faculty. So after this very stimulating session on India-China relations, now let's go to the experience and narratives by our faculty from China and from Russia, who is teaching Chinese in India. So welcome in the session. So first of all, I start with Professor Aleksandra Mineeva. She is the Assistant Professor of Practice, Jindal School of International Affairs. And as we discussed, 7 to 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm especially happy to see my students because you will count me accountable for every word I'm going to say. My presentation is rather a personal narrative than anything else, which I hope will be at least a little bit interesting to you. I'm not pretending or aspiring being helpful or useful, at least interesting. I do not believe in learning through the facts only. Facts are important, but they only become knowledge when we can relate to them. When we can relate to them and create a connection which can turn a fact into a thought, but more than that, into a feeling. We feel what we can relate to, and probably as a part of a bigger whole, we can relate to any fact about humanity. However, the truth is that we don't do. We mostly don't. And otherwise, we would never feel bored or alienated in our studies. Based on the fact that I have just shared, how and what based on the fact of that I have just shared, how and what should I teach to my students about China? Some things that I have learned myself, maybe. My own learning about China happened as life, in a natural, seemingly spontaneous and unstructured manner. I cannot express my fascination with the difference which I experienced visiting China for the first time in 1997. Since then, the search of Chineseness, that difference between my own people and Chinese, defined my choice of readings, subjects, and courses I take. I read in poetry, I read in history, I read Three Kingdoms, I read The Water Paddles, I read on politics, sociology, and anthropology of China. And everything made a lot of sense and was relevant. But it created a larger and larger box filled with the pieces of a puzzle. And I wanted so badly to put these puzzles together to make a broader picture and to make sense of everything I was learning on China. Later on, I have discovered 2 readings, which I will share with you today, which I found crucial in my understanding and my feeling of China. The first one, written around 100 years ago and familiar to any sinologist, is the reading by Lin Yutan, My Country and My People. The second one is the reading written in 1947 by Chinese sociologist and anthropologist Fei Xiaotong, From the Soil. The main argument of this book is that China is a fundamentally rural society, and any study and conclusion to be done on China should be done through this perspective. These 2 readings exposed the differences between me and Chinese culture that I have sensed, but I could not and was not able to verbalize. After I realized that I want to go and to dig even deeper, and that is when a pre-Qin ancient Chinese philosophy came into the picture. But I would like to repeat that these two books have only started to make sense for me after learning other cultural facts and knowledge about China. And philosophy started to make sense even later. So, I remember that first course of mine here at JGU when I assigned From the Soil as a reading to my Indian students. I have just came to India, I knew nothing, literally nothing about culture, about everyday life in India. My assumption was that I will be able to walk my students through the way I walked myself on my own over all of these years, but I will be able to help them to walk this way of learning about China faster. And then they will read these two magic readings and fill the gaps and make the sense of China for themselves. The reaction of my Indian students on From This Soil was completely out of my expectations. It was completely out of my expectations because there is no wow. There was no enlightening moment for them after reading this book. So, ma'am, one of my students, I think, who is present here today, said, so, ma'am, actually, what he says here in this reading is same in India. I was puzzled. I did not know how to react. I didn't know what to say to that particular comment. I was unprepared. I realized how unprepared I was to deal with absolutely different from my own cultural background of my students. I have seen the course I was creating as a learning from zero forward, from knowing nothing about China to knowing something about China. I did not realize that the fact and the knowledge I will offer I will have to marry the students' own feelings and the students' own cultural backgrounds. I realized how little control I had over something that they will bring out of my classroom. Whatever I was saying were the knowledge of China felt and thought through by a child of a post-socialist state in transition, Russia of 1990s, who is yet not even aware of that part of her identity. And those knowledge that I share, whatever I share, my students carry out combined with their own unknown to me knowledge and experiences. It took me time. It took me reading on China again and again through my experience of India to realize how significant was that comment. Fei Xiaotun was arguing that China cannot be well understood through Western sociology. He argued that a sociology of China should be written from the scratch to understand his own country and his own people. He tried to create this Chinese sociology, and this relatively short reading is one of the attempts of him. I also teach sociology, general sociology here. Never in my classes on sociology, taught based on Giddens' book, I could see that my students relate so closely to the reading as to say, we know this because we live this. They had this reaction on Face from the Soil. They had this reaction on the readings of Confucianism and certain concepts of Confucianism. And they had this reaction when I was struggling very hard to explain the concept of Tao and Wu Wei in Taoism. I teach philosophy of pre-Qin China. So those of you who made assumption because Buddhism, they can understand, it's a wrong assumption. I'm teaching China before Buddhism. However, my Indian students are able to relate to the knowledge and concepts I explain much better than I did in my university, although I was a good student. I was trying very hard. To conclude, I need really some time off to think. And I will think about many, many things. For example, I will think about why Buddhism landed so well in China. What cultural prerequisites existed already in China made Chinese people embrace and understand it so well as to make it a part of their own culture. I will think about my own education. I will think about my own education based on European, Western sociology and philosophy, and how my actual social experience in post-Soviet Russia fits into it. I will think about that alien but strong feeling of desire to relate what I actually experience to what I read in the book, which is opposed to the desire to understand what is actually happening with my country and my people. I will think about the fear of looking at self and others openly and honestly, and despite of what I have learned, to make my own sense of what is going on. And finally, I will think of all those instances, all those beautiful moments when my students could relate to the knowledge about China they received from me, which I have realized I couldn't relate, and make sense out of this knowledge for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aleksandra, for giving a very realistic experience of teaching in Jindal University. And you are here for the last 4 years. So gradually, maybe you are learning in a better manner and explaining them in your own ways. Thank you very much, and we'll have discussions later after the panels. The next speaker we have with us is Professor Wenjuan Zhang. She is Associate Professor and Assistant Dean, International Collaborations in Jindal Global Law School. And she is also the Executive Director, Center for India-China Studies. Welcome, and please.
First, I want to thank ICS give OPG to share some of their perspectives. So I have been here for 5 years. As I explained yesterday, curiosity bring me here. People also keep asking me, what's your curiosity, right? The curiosity is, I think, many experts has been displayed in the last 2 days, like India and China have shared so many similarities. I mean, no other country have 1 billion population, right, to take off for development, for governance, population skill matters a lot. And also we all have these long civilizations which America may not share. So how to deal with these civilizations, both is nutrition but also burden, right? How to deal with this. So I think, and also we, unlike the Western based on the Catholic or Christian, so this is based on the Eastern, they call it Eastern philosophy or Eastern wisdom. But the critical difference is that India and China use the different political path for their modernization. So this makes them very kind of comparable in terms of peer learning or what reflection. So that's the curiosity bring me here. So I'm based in the law school. I used to be a public interest lawyer in China for 10 years. So I'm at the very front line to observe the Chinese rule of law development or even the rule by law, whatever you mentioned. So actually, moving to India is also a big transition for me from being a practitioner to be academia. Actually, even today, I'm still struggling because the thinking is very different. For practitioner, you need to think about how to solve the problem. But for academia, actually, you need to establish a framework to analyze. It's very different. So I want to see, based on my kind of 5 years observation of my students, And also, I randomly delivered a lecture in China, like at Tsinghua Law School or Shanghai Jiao Tong University, Guoguang Law School. I think both the students from both countries are very polite and respectful to the teachers, professors. There's the similarity. But I think there are also some differences. So I have been teaching 4 courses in this university, not in 1 semester, but I mean, gradually, some semester maybe this 2, some semester that 2. I have taught child sexual and the law in India and China with my colleague from the Indian colleague. I also taught the lawyering for change and its practice in China, because this is my practicing area before. Then in the last 3 years, I focused on constitutional law in India and China. And then the next one, just from this semester, the Dean of Business School, Jindal Global Business School, asked me to deliver a course called Doing Business in China. So what's the regulation framework and the context? This is a new experiment. So through this kind of, the teaching and deep interaction with my students, I find actually the interest in India toward China is much, much less than what I experienced in the United States. So whenever the new semester begins, I ask my students, how many of you have been to China? If the class skill above 20, they are maybe 1, right? If the class skill below 20, there's none of them almost. And then I ask how many of you follow the news about China? So there may be 1 or 2, right? So they basically, they have no knowledge about China. I feel, I have done a similar survey in China, ask the students, right? How many of you have been to India? Also similar situation. Their knowledge is so limited about each other. So I think this is need worth of this why this conference involving so many young scholars to come in. And also when the course moved deeply like this semester, I asked my students to do the research on the constitutional in India and China. They can pick up any topic, but they need to do comparative studies. So some of my students are excellent. They want to research on how Gandhi and Chairman Mao, why they have different influence on the constitutional making, process. So he has a strong passion, has an intern with Nehru National Library and museum. So he collected lots of materials from the archives about India. But because his language limit, he cannot collect this much about Hong Mao, because the Mao's influence about the 1954 constitution making have been declassified. So if you can read Chinese, you definitely get a rich information, But he really, I think if he gets some, if he has that language skill, he can write a very top journal, paper. But now he can only use the second source, is someone written in English. So I really agree the first day's discussion. So there's not completely difference between language and discipline or language or studies. You definitely need the language skills, especially research on China. So if you have this entry, of course, it's not easy at the beginning, but once you have this almost monopoly, right? So you have the language skills, you can easily become a very, very competitive scholars in the world. I also think about in India, I think now some emerging scholars focus on the rule of law about China, but I think many of them not have been trained by law or trained by both law and Chinese. You think about United States, like Harvard Law School, there's Alfred, right? So who has been both in law and in Chinese. And Columbia, Benjamin Liebman, and NYU, Jeremy Cohen, and Ira Balkan. Any law school, you name it, they have a very, very distinguished scholar on the Chinese law, and they have the language skills. They can trace Chinese, the new updated initiatives, the most updated judicial reform, and all these things. But in India, based on my knowledge, it's very hard. I think Sonepat is here. Maybe he's one of the very, very few who can use the Chinese language to think about Chinese law. But among the academia, so if you have the name, just give me, and then I really want to interact with him or her, I think India should be one of the most advanced country to conduct Chinese studies. But so far, I think it's not cross-discipline. So maybe on border issue, on diplomacy, security, there's some scholars focus on that. But cross-disciplinary, even for business sector among the social sciences is easier because you can get data to have quantitative research. But still, you need the context understanding. So far, I think it's very hard to find the scholars who are very fluent in language and also conduct academic research. So that is sad. I think India should have their own perspective. So far, even the media. So if you read the Indian media, if there's about kind of border issue or about Pakistan, China, or India, so you have your own perspective. But beyond that, if you really focus on Chinese domestic issues, you cannot find any difference, even maybe too absolute, but it's hard to find a difference from BBC, from New York Times. So it's kind of, so that shows you, even the journalists, I think very Indian journalists can really speak Chinese, can really have the interview, have their own opinion. So they have to use the second source. For the Chinese scholars, I think the similar challenge is now very few scholars would like to be based in India. So most of the time is remote research. So remote research, I think they have, of course, there's a biases, and also the remote research is very hard to. So when you study a country, you need to feel the beat of the heart. But I think that for them it's very hard because they're very remote. If India is such a diversified country, how can you just through the paper to have the research on India? So this is a basic, my experience about this kind of teaching and research. I think comparatively, if I see the top 10 students in both countries, I think India is more competitive because they have independent thinking. So that's make them more critical, and they're also committed, right? So that's make them more competitive. But you think about generally, I think Chinese students are more disciplined and comparatively more committed on average. But nowadays it's hard to see also because the new technology, social media, so much distraction. I think if you are teachers here, you will see it's very hard to get the attention from the students because even Jindal has tried to cut the Wi-Fi connection during the class or social media connection. But that's not the way. Today is very challenging for us to get the attention, not just students, even every others, they're all on the phone. But I still think how to use this social media maybe also help us to connect the people, the young people for both countries in a shortcut. So not like through this long years experience. So I think maybe my time is up. So during the discussion, we can have more. Thank you.
Thank you very much for explaining very beautifully the similarities and differences in Indian and Chinese students. And I think, all of us face this kind of issues, what you are talking about. And I think it's our own ways when we learn how to handle these. But I think you will be happy to know that, now for the last few years, the courses like law, management, their students are also learning Chinese as one of the subjects for 1 or 2 years, like 4 semesters. I think if they pay attention to those 3-4 semesters, they can work together like with law subjects and the language also. So maybe in future we'll have such experts who will be working like this. Thank you very much. And before wasting any time, I just request Professor Huang Yinghong, who is an associate professor here in Jindal Law School, to please carry on with your presentation. And we have a very long association, and I know he is working on Gandhi, and we already had many presentations from him.
Thank you, Anita Sharma. Actually, I'm so happy to be chaired by Anita Sharma. Actually, when I was first time in India, the first scholar I met is Anita Sharma. It is 2008 when I was with the Delhi University East Asian Department. Actually here, but as you know, maybe you know that I just joined this university this January, and I teach only one elective course about China. That's China, India, and the West and the modern world. I try to bring up like a macro framework of the comparison of their response to the West and their process of the development of modernization. But I don't think I have enough experience to talk about to teach in China and India. But I would like to share you with some of my own observation on the doing research of India China's comparison. So my presentation is based on my this kind of laws, like law observation on this kind of comparative research of India China. My title is the Giant Global Societies. I mean, for me, India and China, they are very unique in terms of their scale, in terms of the society. So the subtitle is like challenging the idea of India and China. I won't like to I'm challenging the idea of see India, China as a nation or a state or a country. So this is my key argument in my presentation. So yeah, this is the question. So my question is that I'm going to do like this methodological redefinition of the comparative study of India and China. If we look at, maybe people may think that these things is very normal. India and China constitute more than 1/3 of the population of human. But if we look at about in terms of the human activities, which we are going on every day, and that's the base of all societies, in India, China. So I will question people, do you think there are only 2 out of the 193 nation states, the former member of the United Nations, or they are 1/3 of the global society? Then if we measure by humans' activities, then it is 1/3, more than 2 of. So if we compare, like I compare India with Nepal, and then it is unequal. Because maybe it depends on India so diverse. You look at Tamil Nadu, you look at Gujarat, or you the UP, or you are Northeast, or many other places. There are only diversity, but in Nepal cannot be so diversity. So that's the key points there. And same thing in China. You compare China with Japan or China with like Vietnam, they cannot have this big scale as India and China. And both of them already constitute 1/3. It is like 33% of human population. That means what? They show a global society. They are no nation society, they are global society because they are already 1/3 of the global progress, of global things happens there. So it is global society. That's why I'm saying it is a global society. And then we see, maybe people may say that China is much bigger than India. India's geography, territory is only 1/3 of China. But if you look at this about the 9 light, actually the Chinese activities mostly concentrated on the east part. So in that terms, the frequency of the occurrence of the activities, actually, the scale is similar. It's very, very similar to each other. And the third one, about the space of the transformation. And we can find from the upper one, from the upper one here, what China has used only 15 years to accomplish, US has accomplished in 100 years. And India used 25 years. That means their speed, it is something 6 times against US historically, and also this is 4 times as US historically. So the speed of their transformation is much higher than other countries. So if we compare India or we compare China with US, you can find there are some difference because China. So I keep asking people about how about the new buildings set up in US, and people always tell me that the agriculture has almost remained the same. But if you go to China or India, you find there's anything new. Everything new, like the Delhi University, Delhi Airport, and like the Calcutta Airport. I just went to Calcutta Airport. I found that after 3 years, when I was there, it's totally another airport. So this is the change, the speed of change. So it is very unique in terms of this one. Maybe Vietnam can have this speed, but Vietnam don't have this schedule. So I call them, so these two, when we compare India and China, we must define them not in terms of international, national state, but we have to define them as giant society. So that's why I'm saying it's here. And the third one, I will do is very short because I don't have much time to elaborate all of them. And then, sorry, I cannot read by myself due to my eyesight. So, yep. I will do it first. What is the meaning of this implication to our research? I will refer to my own research. And then when we talk about like my land acquisition, my ongoing research is on land acquisition in India and China, I find it's very difficult for you to make conclusion what is China, what is India. You have to specify which region in China. What is the land acquisition? Even in Guangdong, there are different planes, different cities. They have different practice, like Shenzhen, like Foshan, and like and then Guangdong. They're also differently to each other. Not to mention India. You mentioned West Bengal. You mentioned Gujarat, Kerala. The land acquisition happening there are totally different from each other. So you have to specify which place, which case. Even in one place, you have to specify what area. So they always have some history of land acquisition. And there are always different kind of regional change, or law change, or in terms of practice. So different cases. There are so many cases, even in one place. So you have to look at the different cases, and then you're able to compare. So that's the challenging thing for the India and China's comparison. So I would do it in this way. I broke the framework of the India and China, and I bring things there, and I give some kind of dimensions, and I put different cases there. I forget the framework of India and China. I put them together to see what is the result, what is the land acquisition, and what will outcome. So I will, this is my way of the comparison. And we compare, like, we have to also really take care of the time. It's really important, because this is the comparison of the regional change, then region change based on the fundamental laws, and then management law in China, and also land acquisition law in India, and two versions, and also one audience, which are going to happen. We can find that there's what changes happen there. So when that's my point there. Because they are giant society. So when we compare them, we must specify what region and what time. So no case represent China, and no case represent India, and no case in one time present India or China. So that's the challenging thing. You must have a lot of case in hand. Then you're able to make your argument. And then it's global. As I said, it is already a global society. And we compare, sometimes we think that they are separate with each other. But we can find some connection in India and China. In India and China, they are not only they are global society, but they are also under the empire of the globalization. Particularly, I don't like to make division between the repent and open up, and also like liberalization, Indian liberalization in 1991. So even before that, they're under the stress of the West to make a change. So that's the worst there. I give you an example of my research. I find that it's very interesting that China and India try to claim that they have some innovation. But I find that these innovations are not exactly new. If you put in the context of the international context, you can find the similar things in terms of land policy. They already carry out and intervene by the West and spread to many places. So this is the things that it is called land, sorry, I could not read that, a town plan scheme in Gujarat. And I find similar things in Foshan. Foshan have land is like it is called villagely built. And Xiamen, they give them different kinds of land. And Shenzhen give them different kinds of land. And so people think that they are different to each other. But if I look at the literature, I can find that these things are nothing new. It already began at the 18 what? I cannot see. No, I think 1890s, yeah. It already began quite long years, but in so many countries, Japan, Germany, they already have this practice. And the name, but they just call them different kind of name. But I don't say they are totally same as each other. If we look at the detail, they're trying to localize the globalization. So they have empire. Maybe they learn from some other countries, do some scholar or introduce some experts to help them to set up the kind of the policy. But I cannot treat the kind of the origins. But I realize that they localize the global impact, so with their own name. And others, we can see like connections. If we compare both, we suppose they're absolute to each other, but we can find connection very strongly. Like we see like food security. Food security come out in India in the 2014-8, 2013-8. But in China, it is long years, but since 1998, it says it is food cost security, the mechanism to protect the food security. Another one is SIA, Social Impact Assessment. And we can find the Chinese new land management law also like set up this mechanism in China. So same thing happened in the two countries. So, and then I give you this example. Recently, there's a new movie review in China. People are looking at India's medicine policy, industry. And we also see like special economic zones in China, in India and China. So India, I think by and large, India, I don't say they're learning from each other, but at least they are looking at each other. And they are knowing from each other, and maybe they absorb or incorporate some elements of others into their own system. So there are connections among the comparisons. So, but this is a challenging thing. So they are so diversity. So how can we compare them? This is a big issue for us. If I'm not going to break the old, if I'm going to break the old paradoxism, so what should I provide for the possibility of the comparison? And I will say that maybe because they have been framed in one nation state. And that nation state and the society, we have to put them together and know, and then we are able to understand them. So, yeah, this thing is very misleading for me. I have the old data of the land acquisition if I compare India and China. And in terms of implementation, China is more successful in taking land. India seems a big failure there. But this is quite misleading. If you say this is China, this is India, then you forget the regional variations there. It's quite successful in Gujarat. You go to Gujarat. But it is quite difficult if you go to China. In many cases, they tell me that they encounter some failure in the land acquisition. So it depends on the region, rather on the national framework. So if sometimes we just do it on the national level, it's very misleading. But sometimes we have to come out. We compare India and China. There should be something universal. So this is a bit challenging thing for me. But I'm going to answer. I couldn't answer right now. This is things that need to be developed. So my conclusion is what I will do in this way. I would prefer people to think this way. This is the original way. We think India and China as they are one. The idea of them are one. And I would say that they are both. The different forms of both with different kind of items. They have apples, they have bananas, they have any other vegetables, but they have just put them in the different kind of boxes. So this is the giant society. It's a very diverse society. And you may say that, yeah, but in my case, if I am doing research on the foreign policy and many others, I will say that actually it depends on your topic. The truth may lie in something between this, but not exactly only in here. So we need to break this, and then maybe we can consider where is the point we are going to do with that. So this is my presentation. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for a very...
Oh, sorry?
The last slide.
Listen over.
Who is animals? Vegetables.
Yeah, vegetables. Fruit and vegetables.
Dragon and elephant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this thought-provoking presentation. I think now we have 10 minutes. So, floor is open for the questions. Any comments, observations from any of the three speakers?
I was denied, so I'll take the first one.
Any microphone?
I can.
Yeah.
Last session was really very heavy on me. And, I thought I would sleep after the lunch. But you people have woken me up. It's so refreshing. It's a good compliment, to all three speakers. Now, Professor Zhang, sorry if I pronounce it wrongly, bear with me. So you said, China doesn't know, Chinese people don't know anything about India. But in 1979, when we first landed in Beijing and took a train journey, they sang Awara, everywhere. आवारा हूँ राज कपूर and Nargis. And when I visited this last year, they said, Three Idiots, Salman Khan, Shah Rukh Khan. So, Hindi films have made some impact. And, it's a soft diplomacy. It's, Indians are trying to enter through that. Thank you.
Usha, yeah.
So it's also a comment. Where I'm really fascinated because I'm also teaching Chinese language, literature, and Chinese history and everything, and I can relate to all of you. My question is to you. I'm sorry. Are you from Russia? Sasha from Russia. So my question is I was wondering that will there be any difference or any added element to your teaching China and Chinese or China, anything on China, different from the Chinese teaching about China and Indians teaching about China? So do you also bring in your own ethnic, your own identity or your somewhere in your teaching?
So I have a addendum because I was also curious about that. So added to that, given the growing relationship between Russia and China, how do you bring the importance, if you see that as important, to your Indian students? Because as Indian students who are China watchers also need to see what's happening between the China-Russia relationship. So I was just curious as to how you bring that into your teaching. And if I can ask one more question to Professor Zhang. You mentioned about how there is a lack of cross-cutting in the discipline. I mean, students who are learning law, for example, are not necessarily learning the language, and that's quite unfortunate. And I work a lot on Europe, and it's a problem that we face also with the students who are learning Indo-European relations. And say India, Germany, India, France, for example. And of course, the numbers, I think, are much higher on Indian students having studied German versus a Chinese language. And the increase has been about almost 15-fold in the last 5 years of Indian students learning German because of the kind of investment that's coming in from Germany into these language programs. So do you think that would help with the Chinese programs also, or do you think that's not going to make a difference?
Thank you so much for the question. So I answer that question first. Of course, inevitably, I bring my Russian background to every single of the classes that I teach. However, the enlightenment for me in India was that I actually do, because I started teaching with the assumption that knowledge are just knowledge, no matter where I learn. And my learning was quite global as well. I learned on China in Russia, in China, in France, and in the UK. So I had a very interesting illusion of just possessing some actual knowledge, which have nothing to, and being just a carrier without mixing this knowledge with my own intellectual viruses, let's call it right this way. Here in India, I have realized that it is impossible. No matter how neutral I try to stay and withdraw my own self from whatever I teach, it is just impossible. And answering to your question, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but despite working in IR school, I am very reluctant to talk politics, economics, and IR issues at all, because firstly, I'm not an expert. Secondly, I'm trying to make emphasis on culture, and I try my best to make my students take culture seriously. Not only in the discourse of soft power. I try to make my students to understand that culture is everything, every single thing we are doing. I'm trying to make my students to learn about China through the people who are actually in Chinese Communist Party ruling the other bunch of people who are not, and understand what they may be, those people. And I'm getting very frustrated with the comments some political scientists colleague of mine make, for example, Sasha, you're an expert on China. I'm like, well, okay, somewhat. So give me something to read. I'm like, okay, like, not just that cultural stuff, okay. And I'm like, if you want to learn something on China, you have to start from that cultural stuff, because then this political stuff you will just not get. Thank you.
Yes. So, ma'am, thank you mentioned the movie. You know, a movie is very powerful. I mean, in changing the people's mindset. So I think that generation you mentioned is the one what's the name? Oh, yeah, Oraho. Yeah, even several days ago, people share a video. Even they're almost drunk, they still sing this song, you know, around the table. It's very, very popular. And nowadays, like Dangos, you know, Three Idiots, and Super Secret Star, and all these movies are so popular. Amir Khan is much more popular even than Jack Chan. Say it's very popular. I think a movie should play a more important role because there's so many biases, you know. Sasha just showed me a message yesterday, a Chinese, you know, cinema said, oh, where are you? Are you safe in India? Because it's so unsafe for girls, you know, this. Yeah. So this is the bias is always there, you know. So the movie can quickly change. For scholars, it's so hard. How many you can change even you face the students? I think in future the movie should play more, you know, more role, a more important role to change the biases, stereotypes, break the stereotypes. But when I mentioned they have little knowledge, it's in terms of professional field. You know, when I ask the constitutional laws, they have a very, very little knowledge. Even for movies, the only influence also today small number of people, you know. So we need more and more of these efforts for cultural people-to-people contact. Solutions. We talk about there's so little, you know, for the young people to get exposure to each other. Of course, like this university established this Center for Indian-China Studies, and also especially appoint a Chinese faculty to lead this center. I think this is quite unique in Indian context, but this shows how the, you know, globalization we envision at the GGU. And we also have another center called Australian Indian Studies, also led by Australian. So that's the way, you know, you bring this real comparative of course, there is also smart idea, I think, to collect the resources from, you know, these are the two centers that's actually also the most active partnerships, China, Australia. Of course, now we have Israel and Afghanistan is coming up. So we have seen this, the innovative impact of this model. In the last 5 years, I think some of you have got this report. We have the Indian China, we just celebrated the 5th anniversary. There's Ravi sir have this report. I like this report. You can also get it from our website. We have divided different programs for the students, you know, to get exposure to each other. Like we have developed a GGU PQU filming project to trace the air pollution in Delhi and Beijing. So I think the movie is at the later stage. So just, and we also have, of course, a semester-based exchange. So far, we have more than 40 students have been sent to China for semester-based, you know, Eastern China University Political Science Law, Peking University, Tsinghua University, Renmin University. So they have been there. And we have one student, actually, I just got a message right at the beginning this. He had maybe the first Indian who got the PhD from in law from China. So now he's pursuing his postdoc in China. So I think there are more and more, you know, we have created this new imagination for our students, this professional, you know. And we have also received 13 students from China for semester-based exchange here, completely changing their perception. And we also have a short immersion programs, like every year, 20 Tsinghua students. So they select from the whole university, you know, to be based in India for 2 weeks. We give them lectures and take them to different organizations to give them the real exposure. If you look at their feedback, so, you know, inspiring, you know. So we need to create this for all students, and also we send the faculty to teach in China, Chinese faculty teaching in India. So, you know, if you change a teacher, so they will change many students' mindset. So we have many kind of these initiatives to try to bridge the gap.
I wanted some information with you. You know, I like to read folk tales. And there are a lot of similarities between India China folk tales, monkey and crocodile, and Anguli-Man, so many other stories.
Similarities in folk tales. She's talking about. Yeah, thank you so much. Sir, you would like to say something? Any question from the younger scholars? Please
Thank
get
you.
ready.
My name is Ravi Bhuthalingam, Institute of Chinese Studies. I was very fascinated by your presentations. What struck me was the change in mindset and perceptions that you've described through your efforts, both on your own part after having the teaching experience and on the part of your students. And it struck me that this is one of the big problems we have in each of our countries is the mindset and the perception of one country of the other, whether Russia of China, China of India, vice versa. And I was wondering whether it is possible for you, in combination with others, maybe to institutionalize this model and apply it to other groups like legislators, diplomats, and others, because I think there are people who have the levers of decision making in their hands who also need to be sensitized in this particular manner to see a wider dimension and get away from their day-to-day work. So I was just wondering whether there are any such initiatives that you've thought of. I had a quick look at this, but in view of what you've just described, it may be worthwhile thinking about. That was the observation I had.
Any other comment or question from the young scholars?
Thrilled by your experiment here for two reasons. One is you show, I'm speaking as a teacher and student of comparative studies, comparative politics, all my life, 50 years. I have 3 books on India-China comparative studies. I think 3 things come out very clearly. That we should be conscious of the limitations of the perspectives which have been handed down to us. I think all 3 of you, illustrated that, which requires a great degree of humility on the part of the researcher. And otherwise, we have had frameworks which are handed down by our supervisors. This is the model you apply to India and China. I belong to that student generation who was subjected to that. I think you are much more liberated. The second thing is that you are consciously trying to evolve new methodologies. That, there are inadequacies of the existing methodologies. You are consciously trying to rectify that and bring in culture. Otherwise, derivative methods from either security or newspaper or the comparative politics, the usual textbooks which are circulating in the universities. So security, business, and newspaper interest. I think they govern our, what is in India, what is in China, that kind of thing. Whereas, choosing a theme, then looking at it in a comprehensive way from historical, cultural, economic, environmental, multiple dimensions. And finally, the Western versus the rest. I think the dominant methodologies and frameworks which have crippled our analysis, you are trying to question them. And therefore, I just wanted to compliment. I mean, the giant society, we may find some time to really think about it. But the way you have frontally attacked the concept of the nation state and the bounded, the 50, 70-year-old territorial state that we are working with, and you are looking into the future. Or you are bringing the cultural dimensions and bringing Buddhism. I mean, why? The way you formulated it, why Buddhism got blended in the Chinese evolving Chinese civilization. I mean, what is it? Just that formulation, shows the possibility of intercultural dimensions. Therefore, I think what I learned from this is very fulfilling, that the constraints that we have experienced all our teaching career, they are coming to the open, and therefore the younger generation is much better off today than we were. Thank you.
Just to add on culture, this has, it is a double-edged weapon. All of us should keep in mind. It perpetuates patriarchy. It also gives some, leeway to, voice, to give a decent note. So we should not carry it away. Cultural values, undifferentiated, that's all.
Thank you very much. Very well summarized, sir. And I think it is so refreshing to hear from the young scholars and the speakers who have given such good, new, innovative ideas actually. And I think we'll stop here because the time is running short. But with this, I will also thank ICS and JGU to organize such wonderful conference and inviting all of us and giving this opportunity to, discuss and interact with everybody. Thank you so much. And one more session is there after this. Thank you.